Welcome to Executive Exchange Radio with moderator Joe Cristiano, America's corporate exorcist. Hosted by Dr. Jennifer Beaman and George Gutierrez, trusted advisors to chief executives and business leaders across the nation. If you would like to add to the conversation, call 646-652-4620.
Welcome, everyone, to Executive Exchange Radio. I'll be your moderator today. My name is Joe Cristiano, and with us today, we do not have George Gutierrez with us, unfortunately, but we do have Dr. Sharlyn Moore, and she'll be speaking to us today. Our focus will be on recruitment, but not the typical recruitment. Whenever we hear about hiring people, we think of hiring the employees. Today we're going to talk about executive recruitment, those people that we hire who typically hire employees. So this should be a very interesting twist. I'm curious as to what she has to say, because it's the first time I've been exposed to this angle, of business. And so, Dr. Moore, thank you for joining BMOC today, and I'll be your moderator for this whole half hour. You lucky girl, you.
Wow, a whole half hour. Yes, thank you. Welcome. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to talk about something I'm very, very passionate about, which is leadership skills, what we look for when we are out looking for top leaders of organizations. And I think that people don't really realize how important it is to go through a very detailed process of when we vet somebody. There's a lot that goes through in that process. So
yeah, when you say vet somebody, we hear that term. How do you define vetting?
Well, first of all, you have to know the organization.
Okay.
So first of all, you have to know the organization. You have to be very aware of what is important to the board member or anything else as you're looking at the leader. So before we even go out looking as to who's going to be your next CEO or C-level or vice president, we do a lot of analysis of the organization, where it's at now, where they came from, where they're wanting to go, because before we go out looking for a leader, we've got to find the right leader to match that culture. We'll find lots and lots of talented people, but not everybody's going to be the leader for that culture at that time. So that's where we really start. It's looking at the culture, looking at their mission and vision and what they have stumbled on in the past and where they're looking for in the future.
Well, it would seem to me that your assignment is exponentially more difficult. Hiring a lower level employee, an entry level employee, I should say, not lower level, that's condescending. An entry level employee, I mean, if you make a mistake, no big deal. I mean, it's not going to cripple the organization. Here you're doing the opposite. You're flopping. You're starting at the top, someone who has to be right, because a mistake at this level can be detrimental to the entire corporation and also the morale of the entire population of the country. So I wouldn't take your job. I would be afraid of making a mistake.
Right. Well, even that is the whole process can take 3 months, 6 months. The whole process can take sometimes up to a year to get the right candidate in there. So okay. It starts from the very introduction of understanding what the job is about, understanding what the culture is. Then what we do is we call it a candidate profile. We sit down, we say, okay, if we had a perfect candidate in this world, this is what that candidate would look like. We lay out the profile, we lay out their expectations, and then we start going out and hunting for that individual to fit that profile.
Yeah. Now, what's the process you go through? And if you could walk through step by step, because for example, if I showed up, I'm absolutely perfect, I'm Mr. Fantastic, I'm perfect for the job, and no matter how much you pay me, you're getting a bargain. You know that, and I know that, right? But how do you verify that I really am the fit for the job? What's the process and that you go through?
Well, it's kind of a great question, and every candidate thinks they're the perfect candidate. And many candidates, they are extremely talented and they are qualified. It's just that they're not quite right for the culture at that time. But one of the things that we do is we'll sit down and we do some of the typical things that are, that everybody would think you do. We'll interview them. In the normal process, a candidate's going to be interviewed no less than probably 4 times. On average, for some of the longer searches, they've been interviewed up to 7 or 8 times, because you have different people interviewing at different times. So with me, I start out with a cursory interview, start talking to them, I start building the rapport, which is very important. And then I'll start asking key questions that are designed to pull out some of the important aspects that we're looking for to match the candidate profile. And I'm listening very carefully. So my background is also in psychology. And so psychology and leadership, that's my graduate work. And so I'm looking for key things that they're going to hit on as we're talking and interviewing, to make sure that they get the philosophy, so to speak, that's going to work well for the culture. Once they go through that process, there are other skill sets, especially at a leadership level. A top leader has to be very good at all levels of communication. So not only do they need to be good at speaking in front of single individuals or groups of individuals, they have to be very good at the writing process as well. So we will have them sit down and go through, again, these are designed questionnaires, and we'll say, can you please, answer this questionnaire for me? And the questionnaires can be, 4 or 5 pages long. And they'll be geared towards, again, what we've developed on the profile of the position. But it starts out with, how are you as a leader? How are you as a manager? What are the differences between those two? We want you in your own words, to explain it to us. So that's another level of communication that we're starting to work with. And again, I'm looking for key things that you're going to mention that will hopefully fit you into that profile.
How do you define the culture of an organization? Because most people look at organizations and they think of it structurally. There's a building, they manufacture something, they issue stock, they hire people, they produce something, and culture is something that people don't think about. Although they may say, hey, I know someone worked there, they enjoyed it, or I know someone who worked at this company, they hated it, at any level. But so how do you determine what the real culture is, and how do you, in that definition, how do you apply that definition to the person that you are interviewing?
Sure. So just recently we did, I've worked closely with an organization, it was a private club in the private club industry. And they're looking for the top level CEO to continue to run the private club. And the board who oversees the process had been frustrated for several years because they felt like the employees, the team members weren't getting support, they weren't getting training, they weren't being really, they didn't understand expectations. And so when you're looking at the culture, you're looking at the leader as to the culture is here, we need to make this into a learning organization. They're right now very stagnant. They're barely getting by. And just with a little bit of training and leadership and an executive team who understands that, we'll move them into a learning organization where everything is based around the employees and training them. And then in turn, those employees are going to be providing the service that needs to be done. And so as you looked at the culture, you realized that they were very numbers oriented. They were looking at things in a very narrow view, and they need a leader who had a much more expansive way to look at it. But that leader needed to be looking at his team members and really putting the energy back into the team that had not been going on. So we had to change that culture. And in that, we knew that we'd find a leader who had probably upset some team members who had been there for years and years and gotten away with the old regime, and that's how we've always done it. And we knew that we were going to be moving it to a different, more vibrant, it's about the employees' growth and where they're headed in life, and it's about them taking care of the customers and adding that service. So you can tell from just the differences in the mindset that culture was going to move from where it was at to the new way, the new normal.
But I'm sure you've run into situations where the culture of the organization was difficult to define, partly because of the acrimonious relationship that the board had in and of itself. And there was a tremendous amount, because I've seen this before on in boards. In fact, more times than not, by the way, where they're not only acrimonious, but there's a high level of frustration on at the board level. And so, how do you identify what you need when you have this acrimonious inconsistency within the board, and then you're looking for a leader to correct that? And I'll give you one simple example, and I'm going back decades, by the way. I'm not as young as I look, by the way, but decades ago, and I would mention the name of the corporation, but I just don't remember. I hardly remember my name, by the way, but that's another story. But what was interesting, this very large corporation, it was in the Wall Street Journal, by the way, so we're talking about, Fortune 500 company. And he sat down, they were having money problems. And the board sat down for the meeting to discuss it. He was a new chairman. And the secretary came out and served coffee. And he sat back and he said, "Excuse me, who ordered the coffee?" So everyone looked at each other. They said, what do you mean? They said, well, he said, for some reason, I don't remember ordering any coffee. And they were all confused. They said, well, we always have coffee. He said, well, then who's paying for it? And he had everyone at that table cough up a couple of bucks for the coffee. Mm-hmm. And really, and that was his very first act, very first sentence that he said to the board. And since that time, that company had turned around to such a point where it got extremely profitable, and he was being offered millions of dollars to jump ship and come to their company. Now, I only mention that because everyone assumes that the boards are harmonious and they're all in the same direction. That's usually not the case. So in your situation, when you walk in, I'm sure there's inconsistencies, and sometimes you say identify the culture. If you ask these people to identify the culture of your company, and you had 5 people, you may get 5 different types of responses. I'm sorry for the long-windedness, but you know where I'm going. Take over.
Well, no. That's first of all, if everybody assumes that a board is acrimonious, then it's far from the truth. I would say it's completely the opposite. That's the other thing that I do, and that the organizations that I work with do, is we go in and we talk to the board and we do board training. We'll sit down, and I'm a true believer in communication is huge, and being a great communicator is one of the best things you can be as a leader, and that includes at the board level. And there's times that I've walked in and I said, the problem is not the leaders that you keep putting in place. The problem is you guys. You guys are this, and this. Now, do you really want to go there and really build on this? Or are we going to continue to do the same thing we've always done, so we get the same thing we've always got? And there's been numerous times that I've sat down with the board, and I have a program that I put together. It's called a year in review, where I will work with the board at the very beginning of a year. Usually it's when we have a new CEO or somebody at the helm. And we, of course, we want the CEO to be successful, but we also want the board to let the CEO be successful. And that's really incredibly important. Yeah. So we'll do board training, and then we'll say, okay, this is what the board has to do for the next year, and this is what your leader has to do. We're going to come back in a year, and we're going to evaluate everything. And there's been times we've come back and the leader's done a great job, and we've had to slap the hand of the board a little bit and say, you didn't do what you said you would do. Your leader's making things happen. Now you need to continue on that right path. So absolutely, there's times we've had to go in and restructure the board to some degree, and we've had to let them know operating rules and how things are going to move forward in order that leader can be successful. But it's a matter of sitting down and explaining to the board what your role is as a board to help them be successful. Many times, and most often what I see at the board level, is that they want to manage and not lead. There's a big difference in those two things. You can't manage the operation. You're micromanaging. At the board level, you're there to lead the strategy for the year, 3 year, 5 year.
Yeah, who's going to pay for the coffee type thing.
Right, exactly. And so you've got to sit down and say, let's talk about the strategy and let your leader do the managing of the day-to-day operations. He also has to do leadership, but you have to be very distinct with them, and you have to open their eyes to some degree. Lots of times it takes an outside source like my consulting group to do it. They just need to hear it from somebody else, and they're like, oh, okay. But when you give them then a year to do these things right, it makes them think about it every board meeting. Okay, this is where we're headed, this is what's going to make us successful. Many times you'll go into a board and they say, yes, we want to change the culture, but they don't know how. And while they say it, they don't demonstrate that. Right. And so you have to really explain to them how you've got to demonstrate it as well. So it goes both ways. And leadership is such a, it's an ongoing skill that you have to always practice. You always have to consider, am I managing or am I leading? And then you always have to look at how you're communicating and perfect your communication.
Yeah.
When you're always working on those things, you'll find that the culture will move quicker and will do the things you want it to quicker. So the board level is a big one that we work with. Yeah.
Well, if I will bet that if you asked people in large organizations, especially, how do your managers manage? I'll bet most of them, they won't use these words, but most of them would say most of the managers look up. They're always looking up to the next level above them to please them. They're never looking, when I say down, I don't mean down upon people, but down the organizational ladder, down there to see whether or not they are pleasing and making the people that they're responsible for more productive. And I've seen this, where you'll find a guy who's the meanest, mean. You can train someone to be this mean. You can cage a person for life and be this mean. And they are that way. They're just intrinsically mean. But as soon as their boss walks in, boy, they light up and, oh, Bob, hi. Yes, thank you very much for coming in here. And they seem like the nicest guys in the world. Their boss leaves and they turn into Magilla Gorilla all over again. Yeah, I've seen that so many. How do you challenge that? And if you recognize it, you can identify it, you challenge it, how do you correct it?
Yeah, well, how to correct it is well, first you have to recognize it, and that's not such a hard thing to do, but how to correct it is a little bit harder, because you have to sit down and have a real close relationship with that leader and talk to the leader about what their role is in the organization, or what they see their role is as a leader. Those leaders who are successful are the ones who understand that the importance of transformational leadership. They have a very key understanding on how to motivate people. They care about people. And to the extent that I'm a big believer in servant leadership, your role there is to make the people underneath you successful and to provide the tools for them and the guidance. And your role is to know what motivates them in order that they can be successful in what their goals are, either at work or in life. So sometimes you have to sit down with that leader that doesn't see it that way, who's more of the micromanager or the do it my way and I'm going to scream and holler, and I think that that's what's going to motivate to get things done. And you're going to have to say, what truly is your role here? What do you see your role to be? I'm a big believer, as well as the group that I work with closely, on having dashboards and having things that you go out after. But if as a leader you don't understand that the people are the most important and how you treat them and how you cultivate them and you make them successful, then it's going to take you longer to get anywhere that you're going to get, if you get there at all. So it's just sitting down and talking to them about previous behaviors and how that behavior can truly change it and make it easier for them. Hey, listen, as a leader myself, when I started out as a very young manager leader, I was very poor. I look back now, what fools that hired me. I learned a lot through my hard knocks as to what my role really was as a leader, and then how to get my people to do what they need to do. So I can talk, and I do a great job of consulting others to get to that point as well.
Yeah, I work for people who I had so much respect for. I liked so much, and not that they did anything for me, but I had respect for them. They had respect for me. They had respect for what we had to do. I was always afraid that if they ever asked me to jump out the 47th tier window, I would jump. So I'm glad they never asked me. And then there were others that I couldn't even get to work in the morning because just thinking about working with these people got me nauseous. It really. So I'm sure when you walk into a board meeting, you don't find this consistency of everyone on the same page and everyone being complementary as far as some sort of vision, whatever it may be. That there's a lot of jockeying going around, and also people who are looking to better position themselves and snake out the other guy, that's sitting next to him. I can't imagine. You have an unbelievable job. I can't imagine doing that. But how do you get around that? I mean, if you identify this acrimonious type of inconsistency in a board, how do you address them as a whole? Because you may have 5 or 8 people, or how many people you have there, all on a different page.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's not going to turn, it didn't get broken overnight, so it's not going to turn around overnight. Whenever I find that there's a large group, that I'm walking into a board with 5 or 6 people that are acrimonious and aren't quite fitting into the larger vision, then I actually look at their succession planning process, because I clearly am aware that this is going to be probably a 2 or 3 year process to kind of change the board's culture and how they're managing things, but that really comes from how they're also putting the succession plan together.
I see.
When boards don't put a right succession plan together, or they find themselves in these positions, usually you have to go back and you have to be honest with them, saying, listen, this is what's going to have to change. Usually you're sitting down with the president and the vice president or whatever, the board, and saying, I clearly see what's going on, and this is going to be a small process in little doses in the next 3 or 4 years, but we need to look at what you're doing to choose people on your board and the succession planning. I worked for an organization that the board was absolutely fantastic, and I worked for this organization for 4 years. I was very close with the organization. I presented to the organization. I was to the board members. They were the best part of that whole position that I had, and it was because they had a strict vision. They had a great succession planning. They had a committee who really analyzed who was going to be next on that board and why. They looked at the talent of the board, and by golly, every 4 years, the 4 years I was there, every year, one would go off and somebody would come on, but the board stayed strong because they did the succession planning right. So it's one of those things you have to then sit down and talk to, those board members who are shooting themselves in the foot because they're not paying attention and they're trying to jockey for the power. At the board level, I'm not sure why you're trying to jockey for it. Your goal is to try to make that organization stronger, and you are the ultimate leaders. So what are you going to do to make that happen?
Yeah.
But inevitably, you get those boards that are like that.
Yeah. Well, on a couple occasions, I had been asked just to sit in on a board meeting. I wasn't a board member, but I was substituting, and they asked me, Joe, would you just sit in? I reluctantly said yes. On a couple occasions, it seemed like no one was on the same page. No one. Mm-hmm. And many didn't even understand what the problem was that was mm-hmm. being presented. And I often mm-hmm. wondered, how does this company operate? I mean, mm-hmm. and I was an outsider who knew less than anyone else, but I felt, mm-hmm. and I'm not patting myself on the back, don't get me wrong, but I almost felt like I had a better appreciation for the problem than the board members, some of the board members did. Mm-hmm. Do you ever have that feeling, or am I just inflating my own ego or something?
No, and I don't. No, you do. I've had that problem too, and I've sat back, and after I saw the board meeting and the time that was spent, I said, you guys, in the board meeting you had for 3 hours or whatever it was, this percentage of the time was on something that is maybe 10% of the organization. why would you spend that much time on something that is only 10% of the operation of the organization, but you left the other 90% of that organization out that was important?
Yeah.
And, when you put it to them that way, they thought, well, why are we? And so, you have to sometimes, and again, the boards that are out there who ask for consultants to come in and consultants to help in this process, kudos to them. Have an outside, fresh eyes look at the process, who know boards well, who understand leadership well, understands going out after executive leaders, and have them analyze the process and help you get better at it, especially if you know that there's a quirk in the system and you know that you need to do something to get better at it. And so hopefully they listen to those things, and I'll instruct them, have an agenda from now on, and the agenda covers what is most important. Remember, at the board level, you're about strategy. You're not about the day-to-day operation, and you will find that the ones who sit there and are not on the same page, it was because of some silly little operational thing that didn't really mean much in the whole scheme of stuff. Go to the strategy. Where are you going to be at from 3 years from now? And that little thing that you're talking about doesn't matter. So you just have to keep them focused on that. And you have to really work with the executive leader of the board, the president, vice president, treasurer, those to keep that focus, to help guide that process as well.
Well, does the board of directors have really a higher level than the other board members, or is he just selected to be sort of the coordinator? And what if he or she suspects that a couple people on the board are very, very weak and are really derailing the entire process? Do they have the authority to remove them, or is there a vote typically, or how does that normally work? I'm sorry for the question.
Are they like President Trump, who can fire Comey and just get rid of them? No, I would say that it would depend on what your bylaws are as to what levels you have in that. If I'm a president of a board, I've been on that board for a good maybe 5, 6, up to 10 years. If I'm a president of the board, I've been through it, and so at that point, I'm a strong leader, but I got to pull those who are dissenting or in dissension aside and say what's going on here, and remind them again, we're all about the strategy and the long range. Are we getting the long range done? Let's focus on that before we focus on the nitpicky little things that we want to do. You have to look at the bylaws in order to decide which one, if you have recourse to not have them. Some boards are elected. Some boards that I've dealt with are they're boards of high rises. The Galaxy Towers that was in outside of Manhattan in New Jersey was one where my father was general manager, and I had to deal and listen to him about a lot of what was going on at the board level, and they were elected. So sometimes when you get the elected officials in there who haven't been on the board as long, they don't know what the strategy is on long range. You kind of have to get them up to speed, and they can be a little bit more contentious in dealing with them. So,
who typically hires you? Is it the board of directors? I mean, the chairman of the board, or is it an underling, or what? It's usually the chairman. It can be either the board, or it's usually the general manager or the CEO who's hiring me to do the CFO. Or something like that, but it's usually at that very high level, Okay. Well, what if the problem is the CEO? Have you had that situation where you say, well, the organization's running well, you're just not? We didn't get rid of you, Bob.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have the opportunity to take the job or not.
Yeah.
So there are many times that I will refuse to assist in the process, and again, because I'm very my passion is communication and being transparent, I will say I don't think I'm the right fit for you, and I think that this is what the challenge is, and I will let them know what that challenge is.
Okay. Now, what are the key virtues that you're looking for, or characteristics? Let's take the top 5. I'm just so we can narrow it down. What are the top 5 characteristics that you're looking for a person that's on the board, that if they possess these characteristics, are most likely to be successful and help the company grow?
When I'm dealing with boards, I love it when they're very frank and honest. So anyone who says, we just want to put it all out here because we know that the more the better chance we're going to get a great leader in this process. Right. I love those boards who demonstrate a care for the staff or the team that is taking care of the organization. If in our conversations you're constantly talking about training, what can we do to enhance their enjoyment as to working here and stuff like that, that's an important aspect of it. Yeah. I'm always looking for somebody, a board that understands that it's all about the benefit package, not just the salary, right? So if you're clearly understanding that it's the work-life balance and it's everything in the package itself, then that tends to be a board that I see as caring and really wanting to take whatever needs to be done with that particular organization and culture to where it needs to go.
Yeah. Well, this is a fascinating job. I can go on for hours here, but it's fascinating because I've had almost, in some cases, disdain for working in management in large corporations, and I found it so difficult sometimes because I was never in a high enough position to make a difference. But I surely did get the wrath of everything else that was going on, and I recall I was at when I worked for this large corporation, I was at a meeting with the controller, and I had made a suggestion. It was a very simple thing, and he literally laughed at me. He said, "That's ridiculous," and he went on to something else. I'm not, and this is the God's honest truth. The very next week, he had gone to a meeting during that week with the treasurer and the vice president of the corporation, and he came back, repeated word for word what I said, and I never forget this as long as I lived. And I'm talking, this is a long time ago, and I don't remember much. I have to ask my wife, "What's your name?" because I forget. But
right.
But he sat down and he repeated word for word what I had mentioned the week before, and he said, "Let that be a lesson to you. That's why he's the treasurer of this organization." You know what? I said, if I get up, I'll go to jail. That's how angry I was. But anyway, that's a true story. Anyway, Dr. Moore, I want to thank you so much. Our time is up. This is the fastest 30 minutes I have ever spent on blog podcasting or radio. You've been an absolutely delightful guest today for Executive Exchange Radio. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I guess we'll have this conversation once again, or continue this conversation down the road a bit. I hope you. I
look forward to it. It was wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, folks, for listening in to Executive Exchange Radio. This is your moderator, Joe Cristiano, and we will be having another broadcast in the near future. You'll be notified, and we wish that you would stay tuned. Okay. Thank you very much for listening.